Ahneishia probably, what was it, about 2009? 2009, I met her. She was a student at Cal State University of Northridge, and she was in my mentor group. She was one of my mentees back in 2009. I was mentoring her. I was only 18. And no. She was 18 years old. But when I met her, she was just this bright light. And I just appreciated her coming in because she always just had an optimistic perspective. And I had no idea the things that she went through in her life. And she's going to share with you. But I had no idea. So you guys really have the pleasure and the honor. She's taking her time out of her own private practice that she does. She came all the way from Orange County today. Her maps took her through the Angeles Crest that she had never done before. So she was on a field trip. She was on a mission to get here for you guys. When I tell you guys that you are in for a treat, listen, this is what she does. This is what she does. She is a marriage family therapist. She deals with the youth more than anything. And I just am so excited when I called her and asked her if she can do this. It was literally, I haven't spoken to her in years. And I was praying one day, and her name popped up in my head. And so I just shot her a message, and I said, hey, just letting you know, hey, I'm praying for you. I don't know why your name popped up in my head, but I'm just praying for you. And she goes, well, we'll see what it is, what it's about. Thank you. That's so cool that you're thinking about me. A week later, she comes up again in my head, in my prayers. And so I told her, I said, you know what? I really think I'm going to pray about this and ask God why. And when I prayed and I asked God, God was like, she needs to be at Mindful Me. And so I told her, and she said, oh my God, this is God, because I am getting back into running youth camps and doing these things for the youth. And I haven't been able to do it, and this is my opportunity to give back and to get back into it. So this was God ordained, and you guys have the pleasure of being in the presence of the Lord, because I know that what he has for you today is coming through her. So get your notes ready. Get ready to be wowed by her story. Get ready to be wowed by the things that she has to share with you today. She has a lot of stuff to cover, but it's going to be great, okay? So without further ado, Miss Ahneishia Washington, licensed marriage and family therapist.
You guys hear me okay? Oh, okay. All right. Hello, everyone. I love this. Y'all are warmed up. You're well fed. Y'all ready to talk? Because we're going to talk. I'm not going to be the only one talking, right? Okay. Okay, good. It's such a pleasure and an honor to be here. I love Char Down. I was like close to y'all age, and she just poured into me in Girl Talk and blessed my life as a young college student. I love Pastor Corey and LaTora. They are a blessing. I glean from LaTora's story all the time to get through life. And so I'm honored to be here. I'm grateful that God put me on your heart and just bless this time for us to dive into all things mental health. So we're going to be talking about navigating teen mental health, but I want this to be free for it to flow however, God leads and whatever you guys need. So there's a lot of content. I wanted to kind of give you a little bit of information and thought-provoking questions for us to dialogue and talk about mental health and maybe some things that you haven't had a space to talk about before. But I also want to share some of the things that I went through in my life that impacted my mental health more than I realized when I was around your age. And so we'll start out just by kind of going over some of the ideas and thoughts about what mental health is, and then we'll watch a film that documents a piece of my family's story that really tells kind of like what I've had to overcome. And I think what grounds me in the work that I do as a therapist. Sounds good? Okay, housekeeping really quick. I have this little box, and I use it interchangeably as a prayer box or a questions box. So today, this is going to be our questions box. If you have a question that you don't want to ask out loud and you want it to be anonymous, there's some cards over at this table. So I'm going to walk this box over here. So the designated questions box is going to be placed right here. There's some cards. You can grab a card. You can fill it out. You don't have to put your name. And then when we get to the end, we can talk about what's in that box. But if you are confident and comfortable with your questions, please ask them out loud, okay? All right, so let's start with who I am. So, of course, my name's Ahneishia Washington. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. Now, I always tell my potential clients or people in the community that that doesn't just mean that I work with marriage and family only. So I work with adults, I work with kids and teens, I work with elders, I work with families, I work with people in group therapy, and then I provide individual therapy. The marriage and family part of my discipline just means that I've been trained to see people's individual situations and the things that they've gone through the lens of the family dynamic that they come from. So most of the people that are in therapy with me today are adults that are there talking about things that they went through when they were your age, right? So our childhood and our upbringing plays a really big role in who we become, how we do life, how we experience relationships, and the quality of our mental health. So that's who I am. I'm from Compton, by the way. I need to say that because Compton is getting a lot of light, and I can affirm that they're not like us, if that's okay for me to say. So yeah, I'm from Compton. I grew up, I was raised by a single mom, legally married, but living life as a single because my dad was incarcerated my entire life until I was 23 years old. So that's going to be a big chunk of what we talk about when we get to my story and how that affected my teen mental health. A little bit more about what I do. So I actually own my own private practice. It's called Kingdom Counseling Solutions. So it is such a blessing and a wild ride of how I got here. I'll tell a little bit more about that roller coaster, but it's nothing but God. The Lord gave me that Kingdom Counseling Solutions years ago, and I had no idea that it would be a private practice today. I just knew the name because I heard it from Holy Spirit. And then when the time came in my life to birth it out and produce it, He told me, this is your private practice. So I get the freedom with God to curate community resource and needs that I firsthand see from my community. So the populations that are drawn to me are populations that in the world of mental health, there's not a lot of representation for. I believe there's only like 4 or 5% of Black therapists. So I'm of the 4 or 5%. And then if we add Christian therapists to that, Christian clinical therapists, licensed, trained, 10 years of experience, a whole bunch of school, and a whole bunch of loans behind me, that percentage gets way smaller. So when it comes to urban therapists who understand inner city urban traumas, right? Someone like me who comes from Compton who completely gets that kind of background, and you don't have to explain what some of the things you survive really look like or mean. There's not a lot of us. When it comes to Black therapists, there's not a lot of us. And then Christian therapists who are clinically trained to handle real situations that we go through, but also do not compromise our faith values and don't compromise the Holy Spirit being the ultimate wonderful counselor in our life. So having all three of those draws a lot of people who have been looking for somebody like me that looks just like them. So how did I get here? My career journey and educational path. I started at CSUN down the street in the valley, in the San Fernando Valley. And I actually was a double English major there. I studied literature, honors literature, and creative writing. I'm very much so still a writer, still a poet. It's still in me. It just now shows up in me being able to help people navigate through the narratives of their stories. And so then from there, God led me to become a therapist. And I went through grad school at Cal State Long Beach. And I got my master's there, and then we had to complete 3,000 hours with clients. So it took me several years to get a diverse amount of experience with different clients. When you hear like therapists or doctors or nurses talk about their practice, that essentially that's what it means, because our work is with people. Like, we don't work with products, we don't work with machines, we work with people. People are dynamic, and so my work that I do will be different with every person that walks through the door. So the 3,000 hours gave me the practice with different kinds of people and different kinds of situations, so that I had some learned knowledge of how to navigate the things that people go through. Okay. Let's talk about the roller coaster I went through to become a licensed therapist. So after finishing 3,000 hours, I'm excited. I have to take this licensing exam with the state of California. I'm studying, I'm preparing, I'm ready. I have a date set. Went through a lot of anxiety, so I changed the date several times. But finally, boom, we are going to take this test in July of 2021. And then I got COVID, and not regular COVID, like a fist fight, COVID-isha kind of thing. Like, we was in there fighting for my life. Like, girl, what did I do to you? So I had a very serious case of COVID before the symptoms that I had even existed. And I was hospitalized for 9 days. I had to quarantine for 3 weeks. So it was like a whole month experience of active COVID, because before the hospitalization in the 3 weeks, I was battling it by myself, thinking I was just going to do my 10 days and go back to life. And then I ended up not being able to breathe. So I had to go to the hospital, and I ended up having vitiligo all over my face. So all this lovely melanin, honey, was gone for a second. It was patchy. And I had low functioning kidneys, and I had lung damage with pneumonia, COVID pneumonia. And so I had what's called long-term COVID for a year of healing. And literally my healing looked like me wearing Depends, because the kidney damage affected my ability to be able to hold my pee. So I had to wear Depends like an old lady. And I was on a walker because my lungs would get fatigued and go out every like 2 minutes or a few seconds of me talking, walking, breathing. So they would literally just like collapse and take a rest for a second. But in real time, that looks like I can't breathe. So I had to use a walker, because just like walking 10 steps could exhaust my lungs. In that fight for my life, the Lord tells me what Kingdom Counseling Solutions was from my journal from years ago, right? He told me the title years ago. And while I'm fighting for my life in COVID, he says, hey, Kingdom Counseling Solutions is your private practice. And I want you to build that while you're healing from COVID this year. So while I was sick for that year, me and God built my business from the ground up. And I took my licensing test after I got out the hospital a month later, while sick, with that walker, in there with my Depends on, sat for double the time to get through the exam, and passed on the first time. So bless God. Amen. And in this career, I've gotten to do some amazing things. In my own private practice, I've been able to create anything that comes to mind that I can think of creatively to meet people's needs. So I noticed I was getting a lot of calls for people going through depression and the winter blues. And then I made a group called After the Winter Blues, how to help people transition from the sadness we feel when it's darker and colder months and you're in a funk, and to come into the spring of their life again, right? So helping them rebuild their functioning. Before I came into private practice, I worked full time in the community. I would go into clients' homes or their schools. I would see them wherever they were, sometimes at McDonald's or Starbucks, trying to find a private place to give them what they need. And I work with a lot of kids, a lot of families that went through separation in DCFS, whether there was some type of child abuse case or domestic violence case. So I helped families reunify back together. Before then, I worked in several agencies that included helping past sex offenders develop like a recovery plan to basically start to be disciplined against those deviant behaviors. I worked with people coming through alcoholism. I worked with domestic violence survivors and perpetrators, taught groups. I taught parenting groups. So I've gotten to do a lot of really diverse and cool things in my role as a therapist. Let me tell you why this work matters to me. It's a blessing and a privilege to walk with my clients intimately through the hard things that we go through in life. There really is no other place where you or I could have a designated 1 hour space once a week and nothing's off limits. And we can talk about everything from joy to pain, your deepest struggles, the hardest things you go through, and there's no judgment about it, just undying support to help you get through it and get to a better place. And so I get a firsthand up close seat of seeing people's breakthrough moments in real time. And I get to be creatively with the Lord, with the Holy Spirit, a part of the process of walking them there incrementally and gradually, each session at a time. Also, my family. So you'll see later what, it looked like to go through life without a dad physically here and the impact that had on my family dynamics. But the reality is it left us with a lot of brokenness and disjointedness. And when I was going through the process to become a therapist, my biggest heart's desire was to see my family healed and mended and put back together. And I'm still on that journey, and I'm also like learning how that looks now, because my idea of put back together when I was 21 applying to grad schools is not the same now on the other side of like my father coming back home. And so I want to see healing for my family and then myself. So I experienced depression when I was in college, a really hard and heavy depression for 7 months. That was so impactful. It literally like changed my body. Like I packed on a lot of weight because I wasn't fully present in my life through those 7 months. I was wearing sweatpants and t-shirts, and I'm a fashion girly, so that was just not like me. And so that experience of depression literally changed my life. And also, we'll get to it later, but I later discovered that wasn't the first time. I just didn't know the signs. So this is why the work that I do matters to me. It's helping me as I'm helping others. Okay. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, so I want to get a gauge of what y'all know or think about mental health. Some of these will like glimpse over them real quick, and then the things that you guys want to talk more about, we can pause and talk more. What is mental health to you all? Go ahead. Do you need the mic?
How I'm feeling.
How you feeling? Yes. Okay. How you feeling?
Taking care of yourself.
Absolutely. I saw your hand. Is it Aline? You had a hand up. What's mental health to you? Your mental well-being. Absolutely. Yep. What else? Go ahead. Yes, absolutely. So you touched on the feelings, and you hit emotions and psychological, your thoughts, and then you touched on overall well-being. Absolutely. Anybody else? Go ahead. Yes. Oh, yes, for sure. How your body feels. Anybody else? Okay. Let's go to the next slide. Let's look at the formal definition. So this is according to the CDC. Mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being, right? So that's our feelings. Psychological is our thoughts and our thought processes. And then social well-being is the way we function with others, our relationships. So it affects how we think, feel, and act. It also helps determine how we handle stress, relate to others, and make healthy choices. Is that a surprising definition to anybody, or everybody was in agreement that this is what mental health is? Okay, let's talk about what we usually hear that mental health is. Let's go to the next slide real quick. I just gave a few more examples of what that definition could flesh out to look like. So that could include several areas, right? Your psychological, social, and emotional health can look like your thoughts, your feelings, your mood, your behaviors, your choices, your actions, even inaction, your decision-making, your relationships, your roles, including how you're doing at work, school, and managing other responsibilities, and your overall functional health. So your sleep, your eating habits, all of these things can come together to give a glimpse of how well you are functioning in your mental health. Okay, next. So what are the stigmas or the negative assumptions we've heard about mental health? Because we don't usually hear that definition thrown around when mental health is discussed. What have you guys heard about mental health that isn't so helpful or good? Go ahead. That is temporary, as in like the health is temporary, or the struggles are temporary. Okay, yes. Oh, yeah, that people do it to seek attention. Can you guys hear when people are sharing? Okay. Okay. Thank you. So she said that people do it to seek attention, like you're on purpose looking sad because you just want attention. Okay. Who else? I see a hand over here. Woo, yes.
That it's an excuse to be lazy.
Absolutely. Sometimes you hear that a lot from parents, right? Like if a child is going through a mental health struggle, the parent may look at it like, you just being lazy. You just don't want to do nothing. Yes. Go ahead. Okay, wait. Let me hear from her because I heard one from you. We'll come back. Go ahead.
That it's not something that should be cared about as much.
Mm.
People don't really tend to, think about it as something important. They think more about physical health
Yeah.
rather than mental health.
Yes, because you can't see it, right? You can see what's happening with your body, but you can't see what's happening with your heart or your mind. Absolutely. Did you want to add something?
You're crazy for having mental health.
There we go with the labels. You're crazy. You're off. You a little bit ain't right. You ain't all there. Something wrong with you. Mm-hmm.
A lot of people don't believe it. Like if you're trying to seek for help, them basically like what somebody said when they said that you're trying to seek attention.
Yep. So they minimize it. Like what you're going through is not actually happening to you. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Go ahead.
They'll think you're lying about it.
Yes, absolutely. Like you're making it up, even though that is a diagnosis. But most people are not lying about going through things that make life harder for them. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so let's take that same conversation and let's narrow it down into culture, because the more that we look into culture, the stigmas get more specific. So I put two examples because I'm a woman of color and I'm a Christian, and I hear a lot of chatter about mental health in those spaces, but you can speak from your own culture. So what are some of the cultural struggles or stigmas you heard about mental health? For example, from people of color or from Christians?
Like specifically in my household, I'm like in certain situations, like there'll be people who are like, if they see it on the news, they're like, oh, mental health is real. But then when it comes to their own family, it's like, push it off. Like, it's not that important. Like, you'll get over it.
Yep, absolutely. It's like when we see the worst case scenarios where somebody didn't get the help they need, and then now it's showing to be like detrimental to them or somebody else. Now it's like we have compassion. But people we know down the street, it's like, what's wrong with them? Go ahead.
I just wanted to add on to what she and CJ were saying. I would say it's pretty
not acknowledged and dismissed. Like a lot
Yes.
of the time they're saying like, oh, you're just overly sensitive. Like, you know, it's just not really acknowledged.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Has anybody ever heard somebody say like, you don't need no therapist, you got Jesus? Yeah. Yeah. And you know what, I always tell people, because absolutely you got Jesus, and I've gone through things that God literally like lifted off of me and delivered me from like this. So he is absolutely our ever-present help. But we don't apply that you don't need a therapist to any other discipline. Nobody says you don't need a nurse. You got Jesus. You ain't go see that doctor. You got Jesus. Because we respect that God has disseminated giftings to different people, right? Like me being a therapist is a calling. I was a literature and creative writing major. I could have been touring the world with my best-selling books. So God sent me into this field because he gave me a gift of counsel and compassion. And his name is Wonderful Counselor. That's his name. So the gift that I have is just like a small little piece of resource from him, the source. So I always share that with believers, that God has anointed and gifted people to intimately walk with people through counsel of really hard things. And when we talk openly about the hard things, I think it helps people come into the reality of why this field is needed, right? Like I give the example of this. Imagine like your closest friend or one of your loved ones going through their hardest moment ever. And then they call you for an hour. The worst thing you could think of, worst of the worst. And they want to talk about it in detail of how it impacted them. You spend that hour with them. How would you feel after that hour? I don't want you to think of the worst. I'm talking about like their parents got killed in a car accident, or they experienced a sexual trauma as a child, right? Or they lost everything in a house fire. After they call you for an hour to tell you the parts that they don't tell anybody else, how would you feel?
I think I would feel like glad that they could come to me and just try to give them the best advice I could give them.
Absolutely. Yep. Anybody else? How would you feel? Yes, hearing that information would be overwhelming, right? Because you're almost like sharing in the feeling of it through empathy, just by listening to what they experience and being a safe space for them. And to do that is a lot of work. A lot of times therapists are depicted as couch sitters, right? We have our cute little couch that you could lay out on, and we're sitting across in our therapist chair and we're just sitting. But I'm managing all my emotions to be present with you through all of yours. So I don't get to react strongly to hearing that your father molested you as a child, because I don't want to jar your processing experience. I don't want you to back up from the safety of telling me what you went through, because now you're trying to manage my reaction. So I'm doing a lot of invisible work to hold all that in, to fight the tears back and the anger I feel on behalf of them and the reactions that my body feels to tense up to hear the details so that I can stay present with you. So it is literally a skill. Now, how would it feel to do that like 25 times a week? Draining unless you are gifted for it, right? Like a surgeon can do a 12-hour surgery because they're gifted for it. They've studied for it. Can't nobody just walk up in there and cut open your body. They don't know what they're doing. It's the same with your heart and mind, right? There are people that are gifted to carry your heart and mind through really hard things and help you get back to a place of health. That's what I get to do. Okay. Also, we hear a lot of stigmas from or about people of color or from people of color. Sometimes the idea is like, black people don't go through that. We don't do that. Like, go over there and talk to grandmama for a little bit. You be all right. Drink your ginger ale. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Oh, Are you, she said she hears the example. Are you depressed? Okay, well then go clean the house. You got time to be depressed. You laying down. Yeah. Absolutely. Or you don't have no nerves. What you mean people getting on your nerves? You don't have no nerves. You ain't got no job. What's stressing you out? Right? But I think what we have to remember is even though I am working in a secular industry of help, the quality of the work that I'm doing meets the soul, right? We talked about mental health are the things that impact your psychological and your emotional well-being and your relational well-being. Well, your soul is your mind, your will, and your emotions, right? So my psychological health is connected to my mind, my emotional health, my emotions, that part of my soul, and then the behaviors and things that I do that affect my relationships and my roles and my functioning is my will. So we are doing soul work to help people heal in those three areas. And that doesn't have an age limit or a color. Everybody got a soul. So everybody can experience some rips and tears to some parts of their soul and need some help to mend. Okay, let's keep going. All right, so how can we normalize mental health and combat some of the negative assumptions about mental health? I'm going to run through this. I'm sure you guys have amazing ideas. So if I echo with what you're saying, just grab it out the air. We could talk about it, which is what we're doing today. The more that we talk about it, we realize we're not the only ones, right? I'm not alone. I'm not the only person that experienced the struggles of college and it went through depression. I'm not the first, for sure. Sharing our stories and testimonies, and this is specific not just to the struggle part, but the overcome, right? Because when I tell somebody about how I overcame, it validates that this doesn't have to be a life sentence or a label. I think that's what people are afraid of is like, ain't nobody gonna diagnose me. I ain't going to see no therapist because you're not about to label me. A diagnosis is not meant to be a label. It's meant to be a summary so that I can have accuracy of what I'm helping you through. I acknowledge that that summary is temporary to this time. You're experiencing this right now. You don't have to forever experience that. This is the hope that in this time together, we can help you get better. But we have to name the problem to fix the problem. So when I share my story and say I overcame depression, it's like it's no longer a bad word, you know? And it gives somebody else hope to talk about it for themselves because they hear what overcome sounds like on someone else. Providing education. So just like we had to go through the definition and realize it doesn't mean you're crazy. It doesn't mean you're lazy. It doesn't mean something wrong with you. It just means something is happening in your thoughts, in your feelings, and in your social experiences where you're not functioning at your best. And that can happen to any of us. Providing representation. That's what I do in my work. I show up to be the 4 or 5% and probably the 1% of the combination of being a Black Christian urban therapist. Challenging assumptions with the truth and with knowledge. I always tell people the revelation of Christ being a wonderful counselor. I tell people how when God sent me to my master's program, he took me to the story of Deborah and how she was sitting under the palm trees, judging people's situations. That is counsel. So he showed me in his word what I was called to do. That is the truth of my calling. So when I share it, it helps diminish the negative assumptions that I'm here to label people and make them feel crazy. And then sharing helpful resources and tools, which in your packet you have some, and hopefully I get to be a resource to you as well today. Those things are going to help people cope through hard times. The more that people practice the tools and they experience the coping, the more space they can make for somebody else to talk about it, and then they could be a safe space to them. All right. Let's skip this one. So I want to talk about a few famous people that struggle with their mental health, because sometimes there's a certain idea that like only certain kinds of people go through struggles with their mental health, right? So let's look at these examples. Which of the following actresses have been vocal about their experience of anxiety and have become an advocate for others to take care of their mental health? Keke Palmer, Megan Good, Taraji P. Henson, or Gabrielle Union? You could just shout out what you think. Okay. I heard a little bit of Kiki, and then I heard mostly Taraji. So it is Taraji. Taraji has spoken openly about struggling not only with anxiety, but also depression and suicidal thoughts. And she actually started a whole foundation called the Boris Henson Foundation. My former supervisor is one of the board members of that foundation. But she advocates for mental health, speaks openly about it so that it breaks those stigmas down and makes resources more accessible to communities. So, thumbs up to Taraji. Okay, which two of the following rappers have struggled with depression? Okay. Final answer. Okay, so I don't know personally if Kendrick has struggled or if Nicki has struggled, but publicly, Lil Wayne and Megan Thee Stallion have talked about their struggles with depression. So Megan Thee Stallion made a whole song about going through depression after she lost her mom. She actually has lost her mom and her dad, and she's an only child. So she has no close family in this world, which is a really hard thing for anybody to go through. She's talked about it. Lil Wayne has also talked about his story, which is actually pretty powerful. When he was 11 years old, he was experiencing depression and he was suicidal, and he actually attempted suicide. He actually shot himself with a gun, I think in his chest or his stomach, and he was still auditory. He could still hear what was happening in the room. And police officers opened the door to come in, and the way the door opened covered him up so they couldn't see he was behind the door. So they're roaming through the house looking for this kid. He can't yell out, "I'm on the floor shot," but he can hear them looking for him. And I think the guy's name is Officer Dan. He credits Officer Dan as the person who saved his life, because that was the officer that pulled the door to say, "Here's this kid," and got him to help, which is how he's still here today. So yes, those two have struggled. And then let's go to the last one. Which of the following athletes have talked about ways mental health has affected their performance in their sport? Simone Biles. Sims. Okay. Okay. Sha'Carri Richardson, the track star. Naomi Osaka, the tennis player, or Simone Biles, the gymnast? Okay. So actually all three of them have talked about ways that mental health has affected their performance in their sport. Sha'Carri openly talked about the loss of her mom and how that affected her performance in, you know, the public race that she lost, and she struggled that season. And we also know she got sat down because of having marijuana in her system. And so not this video, the next one. I want you to hear a video, though, where Naomi and Simone talk about how they sat out a season because of their mental health from the Olympics. So
I say put mental health first, because if you don't, then you're not going to enjoy your sport and you're not going to succeed as much as you want to. So it's okay sometimes to even sit out the big competitions, to focus on yourself, because it shows how strong of a competitor and person that you really are, rather than just battle through it.
So it says here she withdrew from the Olympics competition because of her mental health concerns.
Increasingly, the athletes are getting comfortable with the idea of discussing mental health and the idea of, you know, treating their, you know, state of mind, their mental health, as kind of a body part, in the same way they would attend to a sprained ankle or a pulled hamstring, that they are going to take time to recover if they're feeling any kind of mental duress. And I think it's a really healthy and productive conversation to have. Teams and franchises and athletes and coaches now treat physical injury different than they did a generation ago. You know, the idea of, like, you know, just icing somebody down or like slapping them upside the head and saying, "Get back out there and do it for the team," is increasingly a fading notion. And mental health is sort of a new part of the prism here. The idea that teams would have an investment and not just the mental health that applies to their execution on the playing field, but just their general health and happiness is a new thing. And I think that it actually, in this case, in an interesting way, has been athlete driven. It's the athletes who are coming forward and talking with great candor about their own struggles.
I think we're just a little bit too stressed out, but we should be out here having fun, and sometimes that's not the case.
In the past, we know that people have not talked about mental health, especially in the public realm, because there's so much stigma that exists. And while that stigma still exists, we see a lot of high-profile athletes talking about their mental health. On the clinical side, we also see a lot more cooperation with larger organizations to try and understand what it means to have a mental health diagnosis and what that might look like for their individual athletes. A lot of people think that athletes just appear and show us their natural grace and abilities. And while it's true, many of them have outstanding physical abilities and we love watching them perform, it takes many, many hours to get them in that place of mental toughness to be able to execute their skills on demand. So I think that it's important for people to understand that even though they see that public excellence, sometimes there's quite a bit of private anguish. It's important for people to realize that these athletes are humans first. They have emotions, they have lives outside of sport. So it's important for them to take care of themselves too.
We've already seen in the conversation that's happening and the elevation of the topic, not just in sports, but in workplaces at large, a real benefit for people to feel that they can have the liberty and the courage to come forward and have these kinds of conversations. That kind of comfort, I think, is a real important thing. And we've seen it in the past, that sports can often be a vessel for broader societal conversations. And I think that's what's happening here.
Okay, so they are pioneers, right? To be so young, dominating their sport, and then to take the liberty to say, I'm going to take a season off to take care of myself is really, really powerful, especially for their age. Imagine having a very rigorous sport with worldwide attention. The whole world is watching you perform on behalf of your country. And not only does it take a lot of mental toughness and a lot of physical, things that you have to put your body through, but then also to have the scrutiny of people, right? People were talking about Simone's hair, her skin color, her body shape. And then also, I think you'll have to research it more because I don't want to misquote. It's been a while since I read this, but I do believe for some time during her training, she experienced some type of sexual harassment or abuse from one of the medical examiners. So you're being, abused and violated, and you're having to still go out and perform your sport. That's really hard. Okay. So essentially, I gave those examples so that we can know everybody struggles with mental health, including teens, especially teens, right? You guys struggle with your mental health sometimes? It happens. I struggled with my mental health when I was a teen. So let's look at what it looks like for teens to go through mental health issues. These are a couple examples. Have you ever felt like you could not breathe while you were in large crowds or on an elevator? Yes? Anybody felt like that? Raise your hand. Okay. So, disclaimer real quick before the next slide. I'm not diagnosing you, okay? It's a whole process to diagnose. I need a whole full assessment of your whole history before I could acknowledge the set of symptoms you're experiencing. But this could be a sign of claustrophobia. That is a mental health struggle or disorder, which is essentially just a fear or a phobia that comes up for you when you're in tight spaces or you feel enclosed. Okay? Feels like you have no way to escape. Have you ever had a big test the next day and you couldn't sleep in anticipation of it? Yep. Or you can find yourself sitting like this, where you anybody a leg shaker? Or you bite your nails, you click your nails, you tap a pen. Those can be signs of, next slide, testing anxiety. So just a little indicator doesn't mean you have a full diagnosis of anxiety, but in that moment, you're experiencing anxious distress. And it's triggered when it's about test performance. And then last one, have you ever lost a loved one close to you? Find yourself feeling sad for a long period of time, crying at random for weeks or months? Yep. That's called grief and bereavement. So grief is probably the one mental health struggle that everybody at some point will eventually experience. Okay. All right, so these are common things, the most common things that teens go through. Anxiety is number one. That could look like generalized anxiety, social anxiety, testing, claustrophobia, and there's all kinds of other anxious or stress-related disorders. Depression, number two. ADHD, so that's attention deficit or hyperactive disorder. Eating disorders, which we know about anorexia and bulimia, but body dysmorphia is in that category, even though it's not a food-related disorder. It's when you see your body to look different than it actually looks. So you might think that you look larger or smaller. You might think that a certain body part is more grotesque than it is. Some people like go through life thinking, oh my God, my forehead's so big, and it might just be like a normal forehead, right? Substance use disorder. So teens do go through substance use disorder. And conduct disorder, that's a category. There's all different kinds of ways it can show up, but some of the traits of that could be chronic lying, theft, truancy, rule violations, aggression, not respecting authority. Okay, let's go to the next. I wanted to talk about this. So sometimes you will go through moments and moods that aren't necessarily enough symptomology or reason behind it to be considered a diagnosable issue. It could just be your stage of development. So at this stage, everybody in here might be between 12 and 18. You're in what's called identity versus role confusion, which really just means you're learning yourself and you're trying to find your way in who you are. So in that process, you're evaluating your personal values, your beliefs, your goals, your sense of identity, how you see yourself, how you want to see others. And that could be a really messy, sticky process. And so you will have ups and downs in your mood just going through the stage of life that you're in. Okay? But these are some signs to know if it is more than just a developmental stage moment. So let's talk about time real quick before I tell you the signs. If you're going through a consistent change in your functioning or your mood or your thought processes or behaviors for more than 2 weeks consistently, that's an indicator that there might be something wrong and you might need support. So if all else fails, if you realize something has shifted in a negative direction in the way you feel for more than 2 weeks, that's a sign to reach out for counsel, including with a therapist. Other signs could be irritable mood or always having an attitude. So sometimes it's not that you have an attitude. For youth and kids, depression can look like irritable mood. So in depression, there's two major symptoms before we get to the others. It's sad mood, and then there's lack of interest and pleasure in things. And you could experience both or one or the other, and then a host of other symptoms with that. But for youth or teens, the sad mood could actually show up as anger or irritation. A lot of times people don't have emotional language to name the feeling that they go through. So I always walk my clients through this, which is just like a mood identifier. It might look elementary, but I guarantee you, when I talk to most teens and I ask how they're feeling about something, they'll say mad. But they might have actually been feeling anxious or ashamed or bored or cautious. But until you have the language, it's hard for you to pinpoint the thing that you're actually feeling. So it can get summarized for teens as irritated or I got attitude. Isolation and withdrawal is always a sign that something has shifted. And I'm not talking about personality. You could be an introvert, you could be an ambivert, but your normal pattern, if it's beyond like your normal pattern of you recharging from people time, then that would be considered isolation. Drastic changes in your motivation, sleep habits, energy level, eating habits up or down, loss of appetite and overeating, less sleep and more sleep, and losing interest in hobbies, decreased self-esteem, right? Where something has happened, now you're not feeling good about who you are, how you look, certain attributes about your personality, overthinking, constant thinking, risky or harmful behaviors towards yourself or others. So when we get into patterns of things like risky sexual behaviors, substance use or abuse, cutting, or even like doing defiant or deviant behaviors that you know could get you in trouble with the law, that's an indicator that something may be going on with your mental health. Other struggles include getting out of bed, waking up for school on time, lack of self-care and grooming. A lot of times with African American youth, one of the early signs of depression is when their hair is matted, right? Because our hair takes a lot of care sometimes if we have kinky or curly patterns like mine, and losing an interest in taking care can show up looking like having matted hair. So that could be an indicator. Struggle completing tasks, cleaning your room, your space outside of you. It's usually going to be a reflection of your space inside of you. And then decline in your academic performance. If you were an 8 student last semester and this semester you're failing all your classes, something is going on and you may need some help. Non-obvious signs, I already showed you the one for anxiety. This is a common indicator of somebody dealing with depression. So they might be walking around, it's hot, y'all. Y'all know it was 95 degrees today. But they got a hoodie on. Okay? You talking to them, you greet them, you say something. Oh, I got music on, I can't hear you. Right? Can't really get their attention, they're looking down. They're not looking up, they're hiding their face. That's an indicator that something is happening in their mental health. Okay? So those are some signs that you can notice in yourself or others. All right. These are some things I struggled with when I was a teen. My self-esteem definitely took a hit. I mean, I was the tallest person, 12 and beyond, for a long time. And kids can be cruel. They don't understand uniqueness. I also grew up in a time where at the time I was like a mid-sized girl with like an athletic kind of body. And at that time in that culture, 20 years ago, that was considered fat. So it was an impossible battle, fully like accepting myself. I struggled fitting in, being a believer and being set apart. I love God from a young age, and that showed up in my lifestyle and the honor I have for him in my choices. And so I didn't have a whole crew that was down with that. So sometimes I had to be the only light in a group of people doing things completely opposite of what would honor God. I dealt with body dysmorphia because being tall and being thick or curvy with more of like an athletic, curvy build at the time was called fat. So then I saw myself through that lens. So I struggled with my weight going up and down. And even when I got to healthier places, I never saw it. I still saw what people said. And then when I was 16, I went through a depressive episode. I didn't realize that was actually my first time going through depression because I did not know all these signs that showed up later in college, hard and heavy. Go ahead.
Most of these kids, if not all, either attend this church or are believers.
Yeah.
But the world and at their school, that's not the culture
yes.
that they're immersed in.
Yes.
So how do you function, or how did you function in that environment?
Yeah, honestly, I had to learn my way. And I learned with no training because in my family, I am the only person like this. And I've been a lover of God since I was 6. So like in my bathtub reset the prayer that the pastor said at church to make sure that Jesus was in my heart. And so my family history, there's no young believers. You do what you want to do, and then you pray over your food and you just tell people you were raised Christian. So living a set apart life where God directly gave me convictions was brand new. And so I experienced a feeling of like never fitting in at home and at school. And I didn't embrace it automatically. Sometimes I tried to fit in. A lot of times I would be a leader or a trendsetter in rooms, and I would dial that back to blend so that I had community. And oftentimes I learned through, hard lessons in those experiences that it wasn't worth it to give up my uniqueness to be with people, when a lot of times I was a light ahead of people, not to be set over there by myself, but to lead. And so as probably like a late teen or like early college student, I remember God clarified and told me that I was set apart, not set aside. And that stayed with me and it carried me. That's what helped me really embrace my unique identity. And then also God came and got me. I would be trying to go to the parties. I was going over there because my friends are going. And I remember I went to this one party and I was like a freshman. And this woman, I know she was filled with the Holy Ghost. She came up to me with a flashlight. She didn't bother nobody else. Everybody else got the dance. They didn't need 3 feet apart. But she came right up to me. She said, "What are you doing here?" She said, "You know who you are. This is not you, and you are not supposed to be here. You know that you are better than this." I didn't know that. I still don't know her. God knew her and God knew me, and God sent her to come and get me. She pulled somebody off of me. I was doing my thing, baby. The OG twerk, we was calling it popping back then. Y'all call it twerk, we was popping. Okay? That's what I had going on. I was trying to pop. And the Lord sent somebody, and those moments happen all the time. Every time I tried to blend in, God was like, "No, baby, no. You're set apart." So it's his keeping, and he nurtured me to learn and value my identity in him.
Okay, so I want to give you a heads up where we're at on time. We got about 10 minutes.
Okay.
And then, because I know you got some good stuff, you haven't tell your story.
Oh,
get to the
yes.
good part, because I don't want them to miss it. And we want to leave room for more questions. So I'm going to ask that you guys pause your comments and questions for a moment. We're going to get through your content, share your story, wherever you're at. And then we're going to jump back and reach back around and grab y'all. Amen?
Yes. What I'll do is I'm going to tell you guys about a documentary that kind of shows my story with my family, and then I'll direct you to a specific part. You guys can find it on YouTube to watch the whole thing. It's only 17 minutes, but I just want you to see a specific clip so that you can kind of hear what it was like for me to grow up with a father wound, right? Not having my dad physically present. So this documentary is called Mr. Wash, and our family actually won a Webby Award for it. My dad was incarcerated until I was 23. He had a life sentence for 20 years. And then President Obama commuted his sentence in 2016. And a part of that process included my forgiveness of him. I held a lot of resentment with my dad. It's not just the incarceration, because he was wrongfully convicted, but he had a whole lifestyle and history before the wrongful conviction came that brought a lot of detriment to our family. And so in me discovering these poor choices that left us with brokenness, I developed unforgiveness towards my dad. In the season that God led me to forgive my dad, it was during the season my dad was petitioning for his sentence to be commuted. I wrote a letter to President Obama, and the letter was so impactful that they put it at the top of my dad's case, and it did become a significant part of my dad's release. And so this film is depicting me reading the letter as the frame of moving through like the visual things that we see. So let's watch just like a minute or so of the opening, and then I'll have you fast forward to a specific part of talking to my dad about what it was like.
this way.
To the attention of the President of the United States of America, Mr. Barack Obama. My father, Fulton Leroy Washington, has been incarcerated with a life sentence and physically removed from my home since I was age 2. It is through your representation that many African American families are able to find a sense of hope and comfort to the brokenness we live as normal in our own households. To bring this hope closer to my own restored reality, I write this letter in support of the clemency and ultimately freedom of my father from his incarceration. Having become a published self-taught portrait artist and teacher of the arts facing a life sentence makes this man not only a mastermind of power and unlimited capacity of giftedness, it also makes him an American hero.
My mom and dad.
Welcome home, Dad.
Hey, you can see me in the background. Okay. So I'm going to have you fast forward. That was the day that my dad came home, and I hadn't seen my dad in probably like a decade at that point. Scroll back a little bit more. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. I think it might be forward then. I was 23. I was actually in my master's program when my dad came home. So imagine helping other families reunify and then going through my own. Okay, so right there, go up a little more, forward, probably right there. Yep. So this is a scene with my sister and I talking to my dad about what our experience was like of him not being there.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday.
That's your own tune?
That's my own tune. That's how I get on there. You know what I'm saying? Listen. Because I made y'all, because y'all are half of who I am, then I can do that. I can say happy birthday to you. Huh?
And I'll accept it.
In an off-tune low pitch. Okay.
So, Lily and Bam, listen. You know, my experience in prison, I witnessed a lot of fathers like myself who had left their families behind. What is it like for a daughter to be raised up those years without a father?
It was, I think, a little harder for me when I was really, really young. I know that sometimes my dad would call and I would get emotional and I didn't understand why I was getting emotional. All the kids I play with, we don't really have dads. Our dad gone. You know, my dad in jail, something happened. My dad on vacation for a little bit. You know,
that's the line.
Right. Something happened. You know, my dad's away, or my dad just not here. He's free on the streets. He just don't want to be here. And I think growing up without a dad, you idealize the parent that is not there. But when you don't know a parental figure and you grow up and you start learning the real life things and, you know, just parts of life that maybe don't feel good, it's hard to swallow. Those things affected me, and so it created distance. And so with that, by the time I was coming into adulthood, dad was a foreign concept. It almost felt like I don't have a dad.
Fathers are gone every day in our neighborhood. We didn't grow up in a neighborhood where family and unity and marriage was something that was sacred and held down and held together and kept close. That's not what we saw.
Yeah.
I was 22 years old with a son to raise and not a male figure in sight.
Yeah.
Every one of my brothers was in prison. My daddy was in prison. My uncles are in prison. It's just me.
Yeah.
So when you ask what it's like, it's me taking my son to every prison you've been to. From the beginning. He was born January 11. You were taken on February 14th. That's 1 year and 1 month. And it's not something that I take lightly, because I drug my son to the example he had as a grandpa to prison. For 20 years I did that. Every place they moved you, I drug him. In the snow, in the heat, it didn't matter. So when you ask me what it's like to be on the streets with my father in prison, as abnormal as it sounds to some, it is absolutely normal.
years of age, I made the best decision of my life and forgave my father for any grudge I had against him, and let his love beyond my emotional walls into my heart. In the past 3 years, I have been able to attest to knowing the greatest man I have ever known as my own father. The most precious gift he has given me thus far is his unwavering and unconditional love. And I see this trait expressed from my father towards everyone. His way of loving people and the way he gives his all towards the best for others is not limited towards his immediate family, but it is truly who he is at heart. It is my hope that his story and ultimately his freedom becomes America's own example that there could be life, greatness, and powerful impact in our most troubling circumstances. We need our heroes, we need our leaders, we need our strong, educated Black men in places of influence and positions of guidance. We need our families restored, but most of all, we need our fathers. With great honor and appreciation for your consideration, greatest regards, Ahneishia Washington.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday. Okay, you can cut it. So, I've seen this a million times, and I don't know why it was like doing a little tearjerker right now. So yes, you can hear a bit of the letter that I wrote to Obama, which I did get a response back from Obama too. But that letter was my healing. And I sent that letter when I was distant from my dad, and it mended not only our relationship, but he told me it helped mend his heart because he was at his lowest point when he received it, and he was losing his hope. And that letter lifted him to believe for his freedom again. So very powerful. And my dad and I are 2 days apart. So that was our first birthday we ever shared together, ever, at 23. So I want to leave room for any thoughts or questions from the film about mental health, about therapy, about your own stories.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
When you're struggling with mental health, like, how do you ask for help? Because, like, there'll be people around you that, like, care about you, but still, like, sometimes it's hard to ask for help.
Absolutely. I think how is dependent on who. So you do have to be able to identify your safe spaces. If you don't know like who you have that you can lean on, you do have to take a risk and put yourself out there. But think about trusted people who have been compassionate with you in the past and understanding, who's given wise counsel and wisdom. I encourage everybody to have somebody on a peer level that they could go to for support with peer things. Then they could have somebody above them, trusted wise adult counsel, like a coach, a mentor, a teacher, a school counselor, a pastor, and then also to have professional support should you need a therapist, getting someone licensed or someone that's becoming licensed. And then the ask from there is being vulnerable to say, hey, I've been experiencing this. It's been about 2 weeks. I know that's a sign that I'm not good and I need some support. Can I talk to you? Can we talk it through? Can I vent with you? Can you just hear my heart and either give me feedback or just give me space to be open and safe? That's a good start. Anybody else?
How did you come to the decision to forgive your dad?
Literally Jesus. I think I had decided at some point that I was like going to do life as if God was my father. And that was normal for me. In my mind, I'm like, when I get married, my brother's walking me down the aisle. Like, if I need guidance on something, I'm going to pray and God going to tell me. And then I would be praying to God and he would be like, forgive your dad. And then the Lord sent wonderful mentors and men that were safe. I had a Bible study leader on campus named Devon. Some people may know Devon in this room. But I would go to Bible study. I was a leader in Bible study. And so we would have these leadership meetings. And he would randomly start talking about forgiveness, like every time. And I'm like, why are you and God talking together about what I'm trying to do? Like, I'm going this way and y'all telling me to come this way. And that experience with the letter, like, almost like pushed me there because it was life or death. Like literally my dad had 2 life sentences. So what are you going to do? Right? I'm literally a writer. I have in my heart what I want to say that could help, but unforgiveness is saying, nope, don't write that. Don't send that. So the decision to cross over the unforgiveness and then pour out my heart on that page was how it got started. Aside from God leading people to speak about forgiveness, to open me up and soften me. Anybody else? Don't be shy. Thoughts, feelings that came up. I see a hand here. Oh, yeah, this one here. I think she has a hand in the lavender shirt.
How do you manage your emotions and feelings as a therapist?
Mm-hmm.
Having to deal with your own emotions and others' emotions as well.
Absolutely. I think that it looks different at different times of need. Sometimes I just have to take time and use coping skills myself. Got me a little stress ball. So when I've had a long day, if I've seen 6 clients with 4 of them going through trauma, I have to do something that's calming and relaxing for myself. I also, if I'm a therapist as my profession, full-time job, 15 of those 1-hour sessions a week, 20 sometimes 25 at the most. I can't take those calls regularly from friends and family. So the person I used to be before I did this professionally, I was everybody's counselor. Sister, brother, everybody calling. I had to put a limit because I can't take in all that pain and still function. I still feel. Sometimes in sessions it's compartmentalizing. And then also other times a tool in session is to use the compassion that from the shared pain, right? If I've experienced something that my client is going through, I don't necessarily tell them to take the attention onto my story, but I almost like carry the empathy from what I've gone through and what I'm feeling as a support for them. So sometimes I set it aside and I take care of myself after, and then other times I use it as a tool to join with them through their process even more. Oh my, it was a process, and it still very much so is. I struggled this season. My dad came home. I think we found out in May and he was released in June. So that didn't give me a lot of time to process. So I experienced like debilitating anxiety. Like I would not be able to sleep. I would be waking up with hot and cold sweats and all of these emotions boiling up on the inside. And so I had to literally like pray my way through that. And then I had a therapist at the time, which was nothing but God. They were a Christian therapist. We actually started processing about my dad in the spring. And by the end of spring in May, I got the call that he was coming home. So I really believe that Holy Spirit used her as a tool to bring the topic up, to start to help me. Over time, building a relationship with your father as a grown adult woman, learning to be a daughter for the first time in person is very hard, right? So our relationship was over letters and 4-minute phone calls that you had to pay for. And now in the freedom of time, there's all these topics that we've never explored in that short little box of those letters and phone calls. So we've had to have a lot of vulnerable conversations, and those were very hard to get through. It took a lot of compassion and grace from both of us, and we still walk those things out. So it's an ongoing process. I didn't get 23 years of being like a daddy's girl or a daughter to a dad. So all of that learning is happening for me every day, even as like a grown woman.
Was it easy or hard for you to express and talk about your feelings? And if so, when was the first time and how did it make you feel?
Ooh, that's so interesting. Okay. I don't think in general it's hard for me to talk about feelings. That's personality. I'm like a empathic, compassionate person. if we're in a room like this, by the end of any night in a big group room, I will be somewhere to the side with like 1 or 2 people talking about deep things. So it's not hard for me to talk about feelings. What has been hard for me, especially when I was a child, is finding a safe space where my vulnerability was received. Because I believe that people noticed I had a gift of counsel since I was like 6 years old, I would be contrived into situations where I would be expected to be a support or a listening ear, and I didn't always easily find that back for myself. So I didn't have a natural struggle with being vocal about feelings. I think I learned to draw back because over my life, space was not made for me to be the one getting support. I was like the strong friend for a long time until I unlearned that. So I had to relearn how to ask for what I need and make space for myself to talk about my feelings.
Hello. What are your thoughts on adverse childhood experiences, ACEs? And do you think there's a relationship to generational trauma?
So I know ACEs to be also like a program, a formal program, and I don't know much about that program, but in general, the topic of adverse childhood experiences is what I lived, what most people in this room lives. Is absolutely connected to generational trauma as a seed for it to continue and as a byproduct, right? It is the harvest of what was planted the last generation. So that's why what I talked about is I didn't just have a dad that was wrongfully incarcerated, because he was in the 20-year life sentence that Obama commuted. But before then, he lived a whole lifestyle that even positioned him to be considered as that person that he wasn't. And so that lifestyle was a seed of brokenness. And then I got that inheritance as my starting point from childhood, right? Literally, I work with people when it comes to families and relationships, and I missed like one whole half of my like family start, right? Whole dad wasn't there. So it absolutely can create generational trauma, but then we also, through the knowledge of the truth that sets us free, can be the person that brings generational breakthrough. Yes. Amen. Amen.
I just wanted to touch back on what you asked about living set apart, and I totally agree with you how you're saying that the Lord kind of snatched you out of that lifestyle and like the way that you were trying to like experience the things that those around you were experiencing.
Yes.
I would say like to teens it's kind of hard to tell them like, oh, you should live for the Lord, because obviously like further in life, like you know better and you've gotten those experiences that show you that.
Yeah.
But me personally, I feel like, he kind of just snatches you away from that and shows you that those things don't serve you.
Yes.
As much as you try to like fit in and live that type of life that your friends are living, just know that those things don't serve you, and nothing could be better than walking with the Lord and living the life that He's called you to live. And He pretty much shows you like, that's not what I have for you. I have much better for you. And
Yes, absolutely.
I'm 21.
Yeah. So much wisdom. And you know what's beautiful is God will give you community, because he doesn't have for any of us to experience the not good that is man being alone, right? And so He will give you other set apart people. It might not come in droves like the world looks like. It's wide over there. So it might be narrow with your crew, but eventually God will show you people that you can walk with. And in the seasons where you haven't discovered those people, it's a sweet spot happening there, even if you don't see the fruit. A lot of the boldness and conviction I have as an adult, where I'm just like no tolerance for getting involved with certain things, came from the seasons as a teen where I had to make hard choices and walk alone if that is what it looked like to walk with God. So if you haven't gotten to your people, God is still with you and you're still His, and He's grooming and developing a character in you that'll carry you through later seasons. And then He'll send your people too.
How did you unlearn being the strong friend or the therapy friend?
Whoo, yeah. Let me tell you, that's like my most recent breakthrough, okay? I'm probably only like 5 years delivered from being a strong friend, okay? The therapy friend should not go together. It's an abuse of what a friendship is. And I had to realize that, you know, what I carry in compassion is who I am, and that's available to all my loved ones, period. But the role that I walk in as a therapist is for my professional work. And if there is like a constant pulling on that, it's an overuse of those muscles. That's the way that God told it to me, that I'm so much more colorful and dynamic than just being the person that people call when they're hurting and going through. And so those muscles of like my ability to hear really hard things and be present and be a compassionate space were being overused, and that burnt me out. It wore me out. The burnout gave me no choice but to say, I can't be that person anymore, right? It didn't leave room for my humanity. And also I had to honor what friendship really means, right? There's a communal part of that. There's a sharing. As a therapist, it's a one-sided relationship. The whole hour is about the other person. Right? I put aside everything that I go through to show up and be a support to them one way. And then they pay me in exchange, right? But in friendship, it should be mutual. And so once I understood that like I was giving this role in a space where it was supposed to be an equal support, I had to separate it out and respect those lines for myself. And sometimes that looked like losing people that I thought were friends. They might have really just been unpaid clients or mentees, right? But that's not what friendship is supposed to house.
This is a twofold question depending on the answer to the first part. Did you ever at any point feel like your dad not being around was your fault? And if so, how did you learn to understand that it wasn't? And if you didn't have those feelings, I know there are some people, young people here, who experience that and are experiencing that. Could you give them some practical tools to help them understand and know that it's not their fault that their dads are not around?
Yes, absolutely. I never experienced the feeling that my dad not being there physically was my fault, only because my dad's story was told to me in a very specific way since I was young. I was told by all family members that my dad was taken. Those were the words, taken when I was 2, that he's been gone and taken from our family since I was 2. So that language shaped for me that somebody else came and got my dad and they were not supposed to. So I knew that it wasn't my fault. What I did go through though, I'm the only child that didn't experience my dad in the household. I have a whole gang of siblings, okay? Papa was definitely a Rolling Stone. So it's a lot of us, and I'm the only one that did not get that time. My brother, a little older than me, he also didn't get a lot of time either. So us two, as the youngest boy and girl, we missed out. What happened for me, I'll try to summarize it quick, is I don't know if it was from trauma or from trying to clean up the storyline or getting confused, but my dad actually wasn't taken when I was 2. My dad was incarcerated when I was 5. I learned that at 23 when I read the newspapers, because the date said 1996. In 1996, I was 5 years old. And so all my life, what I was made to feel like was my fault or something was wrong with me is the lack of ability to connect. I would go visit my dad, and it was the worst experience ever. I sat in a courtroom and watched them take my dad in chains around his ankles and hands and the orange jumpsuit, and it's traumatic. I couldn't even watch prison movies my whole life. When I would go to visit, everybody would be excited to see dad, and I'd be like, I don't know him like that. I'd be like, he's like a stranger to me. And my family would always say, that's your daddy. Why can't you open up? But they never acknowledged that from 2 to 5, he wasn't in jail, but he was not in that home. And that's why I don't have the same memories that my siblings had. So I had to, just with God, I had to heal from that and validate myself, because everybody told me a false narrative, and the newspapers told me that I did experience a gap of time where abandonment happened, whether it was intentional or not, whether it was lifestyle and he's running the streets doing what he's doing and he's just not there. what that translated into my life was an absence. And because of that, I never felt comfortable at these visits. I felt like I was hugging a stranger, you know, and I had to tell every person the truth. I had to tell my mom I wasn't 2, I was 5. I said in the letter I was 2 because he wasn't released yet. Hadn't read the articles yet. Did not know. I had to tell my dad. I had to explain to my siblings, you have to stop saying that story because it invalidates the absence that I felt and the lack of intimacy I felt. You made me feel like I had something with my dad and I forgot it. But the truth is, I never actually had it. So I would tell anybody who is feeling like it's their fault, one, to know it's not. Your parents are human, and that means that they are greatly flawed. Just like we are. We make all kinds of crazy mistakes. And even though our parents, when we're kids, they're big people, but they are people and they make mistakes. And it's unfortunate when a parent cannot be accountable for the choices that they made and the impact that it has. But I'm here to validate you to know that you did not do anything wrong in the poor choices that they made. It's not your load to carry that responsibility or that burden of shame or guilt. They have to own their choices. Just like my dad had to acknowledge, I didn't mean to make you feel abandoned, but I acknowledge I wasn't there from 2 to 5. So tell yourself the truth. I say it every time now, even when we show these films in art galleries and people who are just like me, who've lived that, we talk about it, I always correct that part. I was actually 5. That's why I don't have the memories. I don't let my dad keep telling me the false story because he has to own that he missed a chunk of time by choice.
That's good. We can put a pause right there.